Hi, Daniel. Welcome in our first lesson, let's say. For this one, I analyzed the first 6 games that we played. Partly I analyzed it without a computer, but some of them I did because in some cases I think that it's interesting to follow the IDs and not the improvements by the computer. For example, I might be explaining some kind of ID which is completely refuted in the game where I will show it, but I think that the ID still in itself is still worth mentioning, even though a computer might in this specific situation refute it. But on the other hand, I also analyzed or I also checked with the computer on in some cases, because it also of course gives you some suggestions, some ideas, and this move of a computer can give me the idea to explain some kind of concept which I wouldn't have thought had I not used the computer in that case. So I made notes for all these games, but it's not one by one analysis. It's more like the interesting things that I would like to point out. And I will try to follow the order that you have given in your database. So the first one was the Catalan game, which in my opinion was not the most interesting game. I'm not someone who knows that much theory, and I more play like on principle. In this game, you select a line which is annoying for white, which is I think the most annoying for white, which is with bishop a6, which gives some pressure against c4. When black plays a little bit more passive with bishop b7, white often has a free hand. Now the following moves are okay, I believe, but I think the most, maybe one of the most interesting things is this point. If you check with the computer, you will see, I believe, that this is a losing mistake. So why do I highlight it? I played queen c2, which is a kind of a passive move, of course. But queen g4 is a completely winning move. And I think it's quite interesting as a general observation to see how the board is kind of cut into parts with these central pawns, which are blocking out mainly black's pieces from the queen side. They are not able to go to the king side. So all of these pieces that I highlight now are playing on the queen side, are not connected with the king side, and they are not able to connect with the king side. And white, he has possibilities, as the computer will show out, to increase the pressure on the king side, and he will have some kind of decisive attack already, even though it seems quite even at this point. The remainder of the game, so queen c2 is a very passive move, and I think that you played very well from here on. So this is very incisive, and it's very good that you saw this d3 move behind. And yeah, I believe this position already very bad for white, sorry. So you kind of sacrifice the exchange here, which is, I believe, a good thing, because indeed, when you have control over this diagonal, which is completely open, white has not too much chances for resistance. I also like this move, bishop d3, which you were a little bit in doubt about. My experience is that in general, such moves, which in the first place improve black's piece, so the bishop is clearly more active now, and it also worsens the queen. It's completely driven into the corner. My experience tells me that such moves, even when you don't see an instant benefit from it, are often very strong just because they increase pressure and limit white's possibilities. And I think this is the case here as well. Also, I like the idea of moving to the F file, So you ask yourself, how can I make progress? Which is a very important question, which players often don't ask themselves. But by looking for new fronts, you ultimately find that you can make progress on the F file. You may have detected that F2 is very weak. So spotting a weakness in your opponent's position is something that can lead to the identification of such a plan. So you see this F2 pawn, which is weak. You are looking for moves to increase pressure on it. A move like B5, for example, is a bit artificial. It comes into consideration maybe to follow up with something like this, if your opponent obliges. But F6 is of course also a move which helps to open the F file. So I think I played some inferior moves, starting at least with Queen C2, and that you played very incisively and very well. So it's not that I can give you too much advice in this game. The second one is the English opening that we played. Okay, I made a few notes of that one as well. So Bishop B4 is a move that I encountered in a summer tournament, and I don't play C4 normally, but I've seen a recent repertoire with G3, which avoids anything like Bishop B4. So if you play against the English, it's also wise to have a repertoire against G3 on the second move. Knight B4. Now this is okay. I won't say it's bad, but you make a connection between Bishop B4 and D6. There is a connection, of course, that you make the bishop a good one before closing it in. But I think that you should, the purpose of Bishop B4 should be to exchange at C3, which you can do right away, or which you could have done by now, for example, at this point. But I think it's very important to do this. It's a bit similar, by the way, now that I'm thinking of it, it's a bit similar to the bird opening that we saw. You exchange this bishop, which is generally known to be better than a knight, but you exchange it because it's your bad bishop. It's not really purposeful in this position, and this knight is White's best knight. The other knight at F3 is a bit closed in. You cannot go to D4, E5. It's a bit there are obstacles for this knight, while the other knight has D5, which is a clear positional aim that White has. So it really makes sense to exchange it. I avoid it, of course. And now, okay, you sacrifice a pawn, which normally I would never take. I mean, I'm definitely better if I just develop my pieces one way or another and don't do anything too special. But I wanted to test your resistance, let's say, or not your resistance, but the way you would approach a position where you are a pawn down and where you would need to find compensation. So that's the reason why I played these moves, which are quite anti-positional because of these white squares that are kind of weakened. And it's not that much that I weaken my position, though this is also the case as we saw in the game, but it's more like that I'm giving away my best piece for a silly pawn. Okay, Bishop D7, Queen G2, maybe a bit artificial, but I was thinking of putting everything on white and then controlling to block out your bishop. So E4, D3 to block the bishop on C6, and then play on the black squares with my own bishop. Castling is a good move, of course. Then I played E4, and this point is quite interesting. You played Bishop C6, which is also a decent move. It's part of a plan, and you designed something. So you were thinking, what will I do? How will I progress? You found out that opening the white squares is the best plan that Black has, I think. And you can do this with F5. So often, if White has such a strong center, you need to undermine it with a pawn move. B5, for example, or F5 are such pawn moves, and you devise a plan where you can play F5, maybe you also saw that your knight can go to c5. I'm not certain of it because you didn't do it quickly or as quickly as you should have or could have done. Now, I must also say that there is something even stronger than bishop c6, which I will leave you to this or to discover in detail with the computer. But it's something that how to say that I learned myself by thinking according to some principles. So the principle here is that you have a better development with black. White is clearly not going to castle quickly. He also has problems on the white squares because of the bishop which is gone. So both of these elements make it logical that you would play on the white squares and open up the position. There is this move c6, which you can play for this purpose. But the computer will show you that d5 is a very nice move. Now, I must say that when I see this move, maybe I could have found it with reason. But if I check this one, I would be quite convinced of the strength of d5 easily, because you can already play, for example, bishop b5, and white is not going to castle. Maybe you can follow up with this one, for example. It's also possible maybe to play c6, of course. And again, you have a very promising position here with black, even though you are 2 pawns down. But you can see that this is hanging. He can defend it like this, but it's quite obvious that his development is quite an issue here. So this is interesting. E takes d5 is the more critical line. Computer will show you something like this. But here, of course, you're already sacrificing a few more pawns. I'm looking, wait, let me check with the computer. Bishop f5, maybe even better. It's not going for a pawn. It's like, because if you play bishop e6, he's going to defend it and the bishop is passive. So for this reason, he's going more for positional play. It's not very human, maybe, but I think that the use of computers makes it easy to check such ideas and to implement it to your game, because you follow principles and often tactics follow principles. So, for example, here bishop e4 is a very nasty move. So bishop c6 is an alternative and very much a human plan. Knight d7, f3. Yeah, I was clearly playing on the white squares. I wanted to connect with the queen side. Now, at this point, I must say that I like knight c5 first, because it improves your piece, obviously, and it comes with tempo because you attack a soft point. So I don't see too many reasons against it. You played f5, and this gives me the opportunity to control c5, and this kind of makes your position a bit more passive than it should be. Now, castling, and here I made a clear mistake, which is this one. This should be better. Looking at my own mistake, I was thinking much too statically. I was thinking like this and this and this, but this is far too slow. And you are very quick in assuming the initiative. Rook a b8. Maybe it's okay, maybe not. Maybe the other rook can go to b8, so maybe it's a tad too early to move the rook, because at this point it's unclear which position is best for the rooks. If you play the one from a8, it might end up on the a file later on, might need to go back. If you play the rook from f8, of course, you lose pressure against f3. So for this purpose, it makes sense at this point to wait with moving a rook and to move, for example, a5 first to even further weaken the position. Rook b8, h4. Yeah, it's a bit difficult for me to develop because of this f3 weakness. So here you have a clear bind, but on the other hand, I have the possibility to exchange, and you need a5, a4 to open up. This gives me the opportunity to exchange queens, returning the pawn. And now, well, the thing that becomes important now in the end game is that the activity of the rooks is an issue. So for this purpose, I wanted to open up the position. And here, again, I think I played a logical move, of course, opening or entering the position, but it's a bit materialistic as well because you hang on to f3. Computer comes to the 8 again here because it suggests rook e2, which gives up some material. But on the other hand, you can see that the rooks are now white really has active rooks. He has, of course, some pawns less, but not too much. And we will win this pawn, and this should be a draw without too much issue. Okay, computer can tell you more about it for the remainder. So there are some mistakes, of course. I will not point out everything. Computer can tell it, but but I think that this idea of using open lines as a principal guideline is very important. The following game was the French one. Let me look at my notes. So yeah, playing the French, of course, is some kind of self-torture in some cases, and I think that it's also maybe the case in this line. I don't know anything about it, but well, until this point, I more or less know the moves. But I think that it's very quickly that we get into a very equalish position, where I think that that Black has the plan of making use of his pawn majority some way or another, like for example playing in the center with this e-pawn. But it's a bit tricky because White's pieces are very active, and opening it up very quickly is not so easy. White's plan is much easier. He just wants to make use of the queenside majority and make a passed pawn. So I think that it's very drawish, and with Black you need to be a bit precise, very precise to keep it, which is not very attractive in my opinion. So these exchanges is something that I was not against. So there are some imbalances, which is always good for playing to win for both sides. But again, I think that having the possibility of this queenside majority is something that is annoying for White. Maybe not theoretically speaking, but in practice it's a bit more difficult. Now, you play it very well. I cannot say anything about it. And you also, in the end, you make use of your majority. Your king is better. Maybe this is kind of the compensation that I have to give for making a passed pawn, is that you have some moves with your king that you can make to get into the center. King d5 is not much of a problem, I think. But it makes it more difficult in any case. This is a very interesting point. Wait, let me look if I'm talking nonsense or not. Let me check with the computer. Okay, so yeah, it's not a blunder in any case. But I wanted to highlight something else. In the previous game, I highlighted the importance of rooks in the end game. I think this is a very instructive moment for highlighting the importance of the king. So let me look at this point. So knight f6 is quite a natural move. But there is a problem with this move, namely that White can play king d4, which I didn't play, obviously. But you can here see that, as they say in endgames, the one thing that is most important of all is the activity of the king. And what you do here with White is really push the king away. So the Black's king is not able to get near. And then you can see that having to kill this distant passed pawn is a problem for Black. So with king d4, you intend to go to the center. And if the king is able to get loose amongst these kingside pawns, of course, Black is completely losing. So knight f8, what's the benefit of it? Knight f8 wins the tempo because of the attack on the bishop. And this gives the king the opportunity to go back. And it's in time to block out White's king. So the king will reach the king side. And then if you have 3 against 2 on the same side of the board, it's a draw because, okay, White will be able to get a passed pawn, but in the end, Black will sacrifice his knight against one of these pawns or the remaining pawn, and it's a draw. So this is a very instructive hidden moment, I would say. which really shows you the importance of looking for the king. And I think that if you know such a thing, will give you the guideline to 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 prefer a principle like king d4 and an active king above pure materialism, which you saw in this game and in the previous game. So it's kind of a habit. Okay. I think the major mistake that you made is that I have a white squared bishop, you have a pawns on white. You should absolutely avoid that I'm able to fix these pawns on white. So this is what you allow. And so, for example, king c5, there's no reason to go to the queen side. You can stay on the king side again with the idea that you exchange pawns, and against the last remaining pawn you will sacrifice your knight. So at this point, something had to be done against g5. I think that at this point, yeah, a6 is still possible. It's a bit tricky already because you have this pawn on white, so you can imagine it's tricky. But the king is very active, and it's able to seal the fortress, let's say. But in principle, it's much simpler to get with the king quicker to the king side and to avoid that these pawns are getting fixed on white. There's another mistake, another very principal mistake that I made. So I believe f5 is not a win. I believe so. This h4, h5 idea is much stronger, but obviously it's a blunder here because I absolutely need to take opposition and to get in with the king. And then I am, wait, let me, even this, I'm just paving the way for my f. That's the idea that I need to follow. So like this, and in the end you will be lost because of this opposition where you will lose the g pawn. So a few conclusions that are very important for the endgame. It's the role of the king, which is very important. Pawns on the same side, very often position is a draw. In this case, because you can sacrifice the knight for the remaining last pawn. And you should be careful about fixing pawns in an endgame. In general, it's a bit tricky to fix pawns, but especially if they are vulnerable. For example, here if they are on white and white has a white squared bishop, it's a bit tricky. The following one was the Sicilian. So this was a game where I made the computer work a bit more. The Kalashnikov, I must say I'm quite attracted to this opening for black. I must say it's very aggressive. You experienced it. It's quite easy to play also. It maybe not as good as the Najdorf, which I think is the best opening for black, together with e5. But it's interesting. Now there are some forced lines and very subtle lines, and the computer sometimes is very important for giving IDs in such very concrete positions. So I think I checked. We played a lot of theory, which I think is normal because it's intuitive. So you place your pieces on decent squares. I'm not doing the exact move order, I think, but also it's all very logical squares. This b5 is a pawn sacrifice. So yeah, you have this. It's a bit similar as we saw in one of the previous games. White has this clamp with c4, e4. Then I told you you have to erode such power, for example, with f5 or b5. And then I proposed to move d5. Now d5 obviously is not possible here. f5 also is not possible, but b5 is the move. Now b5 you give away a pawn in certain lines. Because of, okay, it's a exchange, but d6 is weak, of course, and will fall. But black is obviously getting very, very free play. If you compare this with a normal game where you have e4, e5, or the French or something, then white has some pressure. He has some control over the position. In this position, it's quite obvious that that black absolutely has free play for his pieces. And well, you need to be precise, and an imprecise move can ruin it. it's very important to see that it's especially white who has to be careful, because you have to be sitting on your hands at certain points, as I will tell, because it's very dangerous if you for example weaken your position, because of this piece play black has. So f3, knight e6. Okay, so far I think it's maybe it was even theory so far. At this point, the computer says that knight b5 is the right move instead of knight c4. But I will not delve into it too much. I think that the moment that we have now is very interesting. So a4 is not a good move. In general, there is this rule in chess that if you want to make a pawn move, you need to get to sit on your hands and think about it, because a pawn move is a move that often weakens your position. This is the case here, because obviously you lose any control over b4 and you lose any control over b3, and this is quite dangerous. So the question is, what do you need to do instead? And this is what makes the position very difficult for white to play, because there are very, for example, you have the bishop, the black square bishop that you would like to keep, which is a very good general consideration. If you go to f2 to keep it, you lose control over f4 and you give the knight the opportunity to approach the center, which is very dangerous for white. So such things are very difficult to consider and to judge precisely. Best move should be queen c1, giving up this bishop, but eliminating a very strong knight and attaching more importance to the white squares, which is where your piece is on. So it makes kind of sense to keep this bishop, but it also feels counterintuitive that you give away this bishop on e3, which seems so powerful. So a4, queen b8 is a move that is made just with the idea to attack a soft point, so it's not defended. So I attack with tempo, which again is a good idea. We saw it in the previous game also. It also liberates the d file, so you defend. Let me have a look. Okay, rook d8 was also a side effect of the queen move. Queen c1, now you find this one. Okay, well, so you gave this away, hoping that it would trap the queen. I think it's sometimes it's difficult to calculate such things about can I trap the queen or not. But I think if I look here and I have a4 hanging as well as c3 as a square, I already feel quite safe with my queen, I think. But it remains tricky. I agree that it remains tricky. Now, in any case, the best move appears to be knight c3. Why? It's because it eliminates this piece, which is the one that really holds the things together, especially the knight. Suppose that that b3 falls, then you can see that the knight becomes really shaky. So I think this game, I think it's also one of the less interesting for instructive reasons, maybe with the exception that it really illustrates how difficult such positions are. So where you have this pawn sacrifices for positional compensation, it becomes very difficult for both sides, and especially for the defending side, I think, which makes the Moxie bind maybe interesting. But against this line, against the Kalashnikov, it doesn't really avoid these complications. Then we have the Evans Gambit, the first one, I think. So d5 is my pet line. I guess you know it a bit, but not too much in detail. Computer here on Schmittichess gives a few more improvements, but I will not look at these. You can check it themselves. I think you also played this very well, I must say. You played very logical moves. You take the center, which is also, of course, in Evans Gambit style, so it's not too much of a miracle. But black is under pressure. I tried to release pressure a bit by going knight e4 and get some space for my pieces. it's a general rule, of course, that if I lack space with black, I want to exchange pieces so that I get more space for my other pieces. But now you react very well with g4, which is not a very typical move. It's a very committal move, of course, but I think that action is needed. You have the center, but if you don't do anything, and then I will pursue my plan of exchanging your pieces, and the more pieces that get exchanged, the less attacking chances you will have, and also the more that the pawn structure will be in your disadvantage, because you have 3 islands, you have this isolated pawn, but especially these hanging pawns. And they will become a target. For example, if I can eliminate these knights already, there is much less danger for my king, for example, and much more space for my other pieces. So you play g4, you follow the plan of taking space, of going for an attack, and you played f5. Now the computer will tell you that d5 is very interesting. Again, I leave it to you for looking at the details, but it's interesting as a rule to look at this move. Why? Because it really liberates this bishop and it gives much power to this piece. I'm doing it in a group lesson, but I'm also intending maybe to do it in our lesson. I'm also looking at the pawn structures in general, and I'm looking at several kinds of pawn structures. And one of these is the so-called C and D complex, where you have these 2 strong pawns. And it's very important to know that if you have such a structure, it's a purpose to play for d5. And this is maybe a very nice example of it, because it more than f5, it releases your pieces, the strength of your pieces. Now you continue. I think it's logically played from both sides. So your structure is a bit wrecked compared to what it was. But on the other hand, you have a very nice passed pawn, of course. And you have the white square. So the bishops are here of different colors, which means that if you are given the time, you will be able to attack on the white squares. And you can see that h7 is a certain point that you can point your arrows at. I will try, of course, to neutralize it by making your pieces passive. So all of this is done for this purpose. I want to chase your bishop, and now I want to block it out. But of course, I have the issue that you will win this pawn, but it's still quite forced. Okay, and at this point, you played queen e4 and you go for a general exchange. And I think that it may be interesting to go for this one and to keep the queens on the board, because the attacking chances, okay, your king is of course open, but you're not without attacking chances on the white squares at all. And the fact that your king can go to h1, you have the white squares, means that the king is quite safe, and that you, because of the extra pieces that you have, you can still pressure me a lot because of this f-pawn, of course. When we exchange all these pieces, and especially the queens, my king is at once completely safe, and this really increases my drawing perspective. It might be that the computer will say it's a win or point out something of a win, but it's not easy at all. So one thing that you can do for a win with white is that, for example, you will put your rook on d7. You will play b6, of course. The king will go to c6, then the rook to b7, and you will sacrifice the rook for this pawn and the bishop. This is a winning idea that you might have, but okay, you need excellent conditions for this, because the rook is, of course, also a powerful piece. So you need to be able to follow up with king a5 and then make use of this pawn as well. That's an idea of a winning idea that you have. So not so much of tracking black's king, but like sacrificing your rook against a bishop and a pawn, and rely on this passed pawn and an active king also. So this was all played. So okay, you need to keep rooks on the board if you want to have a win. Exchanging rooks is an obvious draw, as you saw a bit later. And then I have a final game that I will discuss, which is the bird one. It's very interesting because the bird game is clearly the one where you're not familiar with the opening. Also the Kalashnikov one, I think. Now the Kalashnikov one is a very, very sharp opening, while the bird is a very positional opening. So this is very interesting to see how you play, or what difficulties you encounter. Now, on the other hand, it's difficult to deal with it because you don't know the plans. I know them as white, and when you're a bit clueless, it's much more difficult, of course, to play. So d5, knight f3. Knight c6 is known as an inferior move because this pin bishop b5 is the thing that really brings white his advantage in the bird opening. Black has many options, of course, but I think that the best is a Grunfeld kind of option. So with knight f6, g6, bishop g7, castling, c5, knight c6, very logical moves. And then dependent on what you're doing. For example, at some point you can play d4, but there are other plans as well. But knight c6 is an inferior move. You can consider already a6 at this point. But I will obviously, obviously, if you know the plans, then obviously I will take on c6. So this makes it a6 an abundant move. It's much better to develop instead. Okay, like this. So the idea is, it's a bit as we saw in the English game. I eliminate your knight because it has control over these squares, and my knight is very well in charge of these squares. My white bishop might seem not too bad, but it's also not such a strong bishop in this opening. Castling e6. E6 is a nice move, which gives you the opportunity to play queen f6 at this point. But okay, I think in the end, it will backfire a little bit because, for example, you already have, you don't have anything yet, but it will backfire. You have bishop b2 with a tempo or something like this, which is not that interesting for black. I was just going to show you this one, that of course you can try to mix up, but again, white is fully developed, and black's king is kind of caught in the center. So obviously you're not going for this, but during the game I looked at this queen f6 move. Bishop d6, knight f6, queen e1. Now this is very important. The system that you play, again, I will not combine it with knight c6, but the bishop that the system that you play is destined, as in that English, to eliminate this knight. Because of the full control over e5 that I have. So what I want is, in an ideal world, I will play d3, knight d2, h3, and if you exchange, then I will play knight f3, knight d5. Now, if I play d3 instead, you must exchange again because of knight d2 coming. I play queen e1, and at this point you must exchange. You don't do it, and you can see obviously that this bishop is an easy target for me, and it's not doing anything. It's out of the chain, so it's kind of sided, and I can block it out with d3, as happened in the game. I also opened the f-file, which gives me a target. And queen g3 also on the king side, it's a bit dangerous for black. Bishop f5, d3, blocking out. Okay, castling is maybe the best you can do, but still not too satisfactory. Bishop e3, and giving you a pin for free. If you play queen e8, of course, your coordination is a bit gone, but I can probably just develop as well. c5, 92. Okay, g5 is bound to backfire. You cannot hope for you cannot realistically hope for an attack. I'm very much able to defend g2. Also, these pawns, if you want to open up the king side, you need a long way before you have a confrontation. You can exchange pawns, and I will remove my queen, and I will close the king side whenever I am able to. But what I do like is, of course, that you try to get some counterplay. I think it's very important to play with such a principle in mind. Maybe it's more promising to play something like f6 and to focus more on the center. Because I believe that if you leave the center as it is, you cannot do anything on the king side. So just follow up. Okay, this is with tempo again that I capture pawn. F6 opens up, but it's only beneficial for my pieces because your pieces, they are still very restricted and mine are getting space. I think this is a true blow that you receive here. But okay, it's very logical. Your worse, you're opening a position, so it's logical that it backfires. But better die trying than otherwise, I think. This is all not too difficult. Here I put your knight on a worse position. And now it's maybe interesting to see how in the next moves, how I really, before trying to attack, that I really try to reorganize my pieces or develop my pieces. So all of these moves that I play now are designed with the developing idea. And also, I also try to make use of exchange offers to get further. Okay. Well, that was it. I hope you liked it a little bit. It was not too short of a video, but any feedback is welcome, of course. See you later.